Welcome to Sgwrs, Estyn's podcast. I'm Janine Bennett, one of His Majesty's Inspectors at Estyn and the author of our thematic report, Learner Behaviour in Further Education Colleges, Understanding, Supporting and Promoting Positive Behaviour. I'm delighted today to be joined by Ava Rees, Director of Learner Journey at Pembrokeshire College, and Michelle Hiller-Foster, Vice Principal of Quality and Learner Journey at Cardiff and Vale College. Thank you both for joining us. What is interesting about having both of you here is that you're from very different colleges in terms of demographics and geography. Ava, you're obviously from a smaller single-sited college in the west of Wales, and Michelle, you're from one of your campuses is city centre based, but there are also other campuses to Cardiff and Vale College. So thank you both for being here.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
So just really interested to talk to you both about what your learner community looks like and the sorts of behaviours that your learners exhibit in your organisation. So Ava, if I start with you, are you able to share?
No problem. So as you outlined, we are one of the smaller FE colleges in Wales. I think there is actually only one that's smaller than us. So we have around 1,800 full-time learners. Our part-time provision grows to sort of over 10,000, but that then includes our consortium partners through work-based learning, part-time and adult learning. But on our single site, we would have our 1,800 full-time learners. And in contrast to, I think, the demographic that Michelle serves, in Pembrokeshire, we have, I think it's about 96% of our learners would identify themselves as white. So although within Pembrokeshire itself, our global majority population is larger than the rest of Pembrokeshire as a whole, it's obviously still much, much smaller than what you might find in Cardiff and the Vale, Gower College, Cambria, some of the larger colleges in Wales.
And would it be fair to say that most of your learners are typically school leaver age, sort of from 16 to 18?
Yes, very much so. Our full-time learners outside of our apprenticeships are very much our school leavers. So 16 to 19 really is our largest demographic. We are the largest, we're the only College of Further Education in Pembrokeshire, and we would pull in learners from south of Ceredigion and kind of northwest of Sgwrs, Carmarthenshire as well.
Thank you. That's really helpful context. I imagine it looks a little bit different for you, Michelle, in Cardiff and Vale College.
Most definitely. As you said, Cardiff and Vale College is one of the largest in Wales. We have over 5,000 full-time learners. Most of those are 16 to 18. And we have about 14,000 apprentices. Our demographic is radically different. 34% of our learners come from Black ethnic minority groups. And we've got about 1,400 asylum seekers and refugees among our wider cohort, and around 50% of our learners come from areas of high deprivation. So it's a very different sort of feel being in a city centre, multi-site college.
Absolutely. And it will be interesting to see then what similarities there are in terms of the behaviours and equally what differences. So, Michelle, just following on from what you've described then, how would you describe learner behaviour in your organisation?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that our learners tell us that behaviour is good. Our learners enjoy being at college. They like what we do. They feel safe at college. Predominantly, the sorts of behaviour that we experience is that niggling, low-level irritation behaviour. Learners bringing arguments in from outside into college. Learners using their phones when they shouldn't be using their phones. Learners falling out with each other, making up, then falling out again. That low-level behaviour. Learners saying things that they shouldn't say and then getting them into trouble. And that's, it's key for us. We're a learning establishment. It's about us educating our learners with that behaviour and not being, you can't be in college now because of that behaviour. It's about us supporting our learners to learn what appropriate behaviour is in college and then in the workplace, because all of our colleges are about preparing our learners for the workplace.
Absolutely. And what's interesting is the point that you made about quite often issues start outside of the college and then they're brought into the college community. That was something that we found through our report. And Ava, is that a similar position in Pembrokeshire?
Absolutely. Much as Michelle's just said, Learners tell us they feel safe and that their college experience, their learning experience and the community experience is largely a very positive one. It is that low level, niggly, I think you called it the niggly behaviour, which can be in some ways trickier to challenge because it's like an incessant trickle. And it's that whole policy of don't walk by that level of behaviour, pick it up. So that's a very much a cohesive staff approach where every member of staff knows that it's their responsibility to challenge any kind of sort of low level behaviour, poor behaviour, so they see to pick it up and address it, because unless it's addressed, then it will grow into a much larger problem. And I think that consistency is something you picked up in your report, how the colleges that you saw, you could see that there was a cohesive staff approach to tackling these kind of, should we call them mildly negative behaviours, which can really, but they can grow into something more pernicious. The kind of the low level banter that moves into a more kind of misogynistic kind of sphere, or even into kind of peer-on-peer abuse sphere, which is obviously much, much more serious. But it's by tackling the low-level behaviour and not letting it go unchallenged that we can manage those more serious issues.
And can I pick up on that point you mentioned there about that? One of the messages is seeing that increase in misogynistic behaviour, and how prevalent is that? How common is it now in colleges, and does that reflect your experiences that you are seeing an increase?
It's still not the most prevalent of our negative behaviours, but it is increasingly challenging, partly because much like some of the sort of social media misuse, it's happening off-site. And it's also historical behaviour or learned ways of thinking that are being brought into college. And we have a really limited control over what has happened before. So in those formative years when they're kind of 11, young men in particular, ages 11 up to, well, younger actually, according to recent reports, that even in primary schools, this kind of incel behaviour, or incel is the wrong word, but the misogynistic behaviour is becoming a real problem. And I think that it's just something that we have to be constantly aware of and constantly challenge through our tutorial programmes and through creating a culture of respect in our colleges, so that they're safe spaces for people to share any issues that they encounter of that nature.
Thank you, Ava. And is that something you're seeing in Cardiff and Vale as well, Michelle?
Absolutely. Those microaggressions, the banter, the language that is used, that is the most likely misogynistic behaviour that we're experiencing. It's language that's learnt at home. It's language that is learnt via social media and on the internet. And it's a really vital part of a college's experience for learners that we work with those microaggressions and we educate our learners so they understand why that language is impactful and what impact it's having on the other people in their class and also their teachers.
Yeah. Okay. But as you've both rightly said, those are more isolated incidents. Is one of the other sort of negative behaviours that we were getting messages about when we were conducting our research for this report was around increase in young people vaping, and not just the fact that they are vaping, but that they're vaping in spaces where they absolutely shouldn't be. And one of the comments I frequently got that it's almost subconscious. Learners will pull out a vape in class or in a workshop or wherever they happen to be, whether that's in a communal area. And that was quite a strong message that was coming through from colleges about the growing concerns around the number of young people that are vaping, the lack of understanding about the possible consequences of vaping, and the inappropriateness of doing it in spaces where you shouldn't. And again, interested to sort of explore that angle with you. So, Michelle, do you want to start us off?
I think I would absolutely agree that more young people are vaping now than smoking. And I think it's also easy to conclude that you're more likely to vape than to smoke. And people think that it's safer to vape than to smoke. And it's certainly something that we saw as a challenge at the start of term in September, where people were vaping in toilets and setting smoke detectors off. People are vaping in canteen spaces. But when we put in place some feedback for learners, some induction activities, we spoke to learners via our student union team, and it is something that did actually ease during the academic year. And to reflect on that, we've considered that we need to do much more in September induction to identify where learners can and can't vape, because our previous policy was that you couldn't vape or smoke anywhere on college sites. So that meant that students were vaping in other spaces, congregating outside campuses to vape or to smoke. So we've reviewed that, and from September we will have identified spaces where people can go to vape and smoke, and that will be reinforced right from induction.
And I'm assuming that your learner voice informed that decision as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have paid sabbatical officers and student union officers, and of course course reps, like most colleges will on every group. And their feedback was that they didn't like the vaping outside campuses, that sometimes it meant that there were lots of groups of learners outside, which if you're anxious about coming into college, you'd find it difficult to walk past those groups of learners. And it was felt very much that we needed to have identified spaces where people could go to vape and smoke.
And is it a similar situation in Pembrokeshire, Ava? Is it something that you're covering off in those early stages at induction? And equally, do you have designated vaping spaces, or as a college, have you made a decision not to go down that route?
So we have. So as we'd said earlier, we're pretty much a single site of this and some minor off-site activity. We have one designated space, which is a smoking area and a vaping area, which has existed certainly for as long as I've been in the college. There is regular representation from Learner Voice about having it, enclosed so that they can be saved from the warm and the dry whilst they vape or smoke. And that has been the college decision has been to resist that, partly because it's a really difficult position to be in, because obviously we don't want them to be pushed into corners where they shouldn't be going to vape or smoke. But equally, as an institution of learning, and with health and well-being as one of our kind of sort of top strategic goals for learners, we can't be seen to be really encouraging it either. So for the moment, we have our space they can go. Similarly to you, Michelle, in Pembrokeshire College, in last academic year, we had tremendous problems with learners vaping inside in toilets, in corridors, fire alarms going off, and the whole college having to troop out.
And disrupting exams as well.
Lessons, disrupting exams. It was a real nightmare. And so, sort of almost word for word the same as what Cardiff and the Vale have done. We met with the learners, we brought them into a central space to talk to them about the effect that this behaviour was having on the learner community. We brought it back into induction, addressing vaping and actually things like mobile phone use in classrooms. These kinds of niggly behaviours we were talking about at the top of the conversation, and just brought the learners together and put it to them that these are the problems your staff are facing. We're trying to get you ready for work or ready for university or whatever your progression is. You need to make this learning a positive experience, and be responsible and be respectful for your environment. And it can sound a bit preachy, and I know that I'm sounding a little bit preachy now. Hopefully we didn't sound quite so preachy on the stage. But it has worked. We haven't had any of those kind of mass exodus fire alarms, fingers crossed.
Well, that's very encouraging.
This year.
Yes.
So since we met in November when you came to do the thematic, that was something that was still very fresh in our memories.
Absolutely, it was.
So I don't think we've won the battle, But I don't think you ever win the battle on these kind of behaviours, because you have to just keep going with because every year is a fresh intake of learners.
Of course it is.
Who are experiencing that freedom of being in an FE setting, from having been ruled by bells, and, every hour has been timetabled, and they're experimenting, being young adults, and we have to give them the right space, the right boundaries for them to do that.
Do you think it's something that staff feel readily able to challenge? Or do you think there are occasions where vaping is so commonplace that it almost goes unnoticed?
I think it can be overwhelming at times, especially that unconscious pulling out of your pocket and having a vape without even thinking about it.
I think, as with cigarette smoke, the benefit of vaping is that the smell is quite purveyant. So it's quite difficult to get away with vaping in corners if you've got the sweet smell and the vape going up there. But I think it does prove what we were both talking about, how if you're setting standards and clear expectations about why you can't vape on site, what impact that has, that our learners will follow that. And the fact that we've both experienced it relatively early in the term, but then we stopped experiencing those problems, shows how, if you all work together, that you do get the result that you need in the end.
Can I pick up on you've both sort of touched on this, the point around phone misuse, which is low level, but equally those challenges with social media.
Yeah.
And that links to the point you made earlier about often these things start outside of the college and then they're brought into the college. So they might be, banter online that's turned into something more. It might be manipulation of images, sort of a range of different ways that young people are using social media inappropriately. How do you tackle that? So you talked about vaping is part of your induction activities and tutorial activities. Is it similar with sort of addressing issues around social media?
Staying safe online has to be something that we do with our learners in induction, and we repeat it again in a few weeks after induction, because it is the one area that has a huge impact both on the class and the learners' engagement in the class, on learner well-being, but also it can escalate really, really quickly to become a problem and a safeguarding problem. So it links back to what I said earlier. It's really important that as a college, we help our learners understand what being safe online is and how they can maintain their own safety and the impact that it can have on themselves, their friends, and their future careers if they do put things into the internet and the social media universe. But of course, it's a challenge. And we all know that we're all probably just as bad, that we're all attached to our mobile phones.
We are.
And it's part of the zeitgeist to just pick it up and look at it all the time. And while you're doing that, you're not concentrating on your lesson. But also, if something's on there that upsets you and makes you anxious, then it's going to take your mind off your lesson. And you could be responding to something very quickly and then making it worse. So it's really important that both in induction and in tutorial that we help our learners stay safe online, but also that we supplement that with personal support from safeguarding and wellbeing teams if things do go wrong.
Okay, and what might that, so if we can tease out that point around support a little bit more, and whether it's support in terms of something going wrong as a result of social media or something going wrong for whatever reason, can you talk to me a little bit about what support might look like for keep bringing it back to behaviours, so where a young person is on the receiving end of poor behaviours or indeed exhibiting poor behaviours?
I think it's about making sure that you have both individual support, but also that learning is then experienced by the whole group. Or if it's something significant, it could be by the whole of the cohort. So if something goes wrong with a young person on social media, whether they've done something or whether they've been the victim of something, it's about ensuring that they have support from the wellbeing team or the safeguarding team that talks them through how they can keep themselves safe, and whether that's counselling or just one-to-one discussions about talking that through and the impact that it's had on them. But then expanding that learning so that you're developing a tutorial activity with the student cohort. If you, it's like a speed awareness course, isn't it? And we're talking about that as a network at the moment, about if somebody does something wrong, the initial response will not be, you have to go to college, you have to leave college now, but that we put some interventions in place to talk them through why it was a problem and what they can do next time to avoid that being a problem. Just if you're a couple of miles an hour over the speed limit, you don't lose your license. Yeah. You go on a speed awareness course, and we are an educational institution, and it's important that we remember that and that we put strategies in place for that.
And from what you've described there, it sounds like there are quite robust support mechanisms in place. There are a number of different areas of special. You mentioned counselling, you mentioned wellbeing, you mentioned safeguarding. And so for you, Ava, in Pembrokeshire, how easy is it for a young person to access that support? Is it a case of they need to be referred by a member of staff? Can they access it? Can they self-refer?
I think we probably have a very, very similar setup to what I would absolutely support every single thing that Michelle has just outlined. We perhaps call our support team slightly different things, but it is very much about understanding the why of why certain behaviours have happened, and then that impact. So we operate. We operate from a trauma-informed perspective, as do all of our colleges, and all of our staff are trained to kind of view behaviours through that trauma-informed lens.
Can you explain a little bit more around that, just if there's anybody that's listening to us that doesn't fully understand trauma-informed?
So if you're looking at trauma-informed practice, then you are making sure that you're not making assumptions about an individual's lived experience. And so you are taking the time to understand why a young person may be acting, or more often reacting, in the way that they do. So instead of going straight in with punishment, disciplinary, you're looking at positive behaviour management. And in fact, we have rewritten our behaviour policy to be a positive behaviour policy, which was extensively consulted upon by staff and learners. So our learner executive, our course representatives fed into that policy. And it's something that is flagged in their transition, in their enrolment, in their induction. And so we're creating that environment of support. But the learner also needs to know that there are stages. So that within the behaviour policy, they will be supported, but they will also be taken through stages of stage 1 or stage 2 or stage 3, depending on how they've reacted.
Absolutely clear where they are in the
It's
process.
all completely transparent and clear, but they are supported around it. So we would never have a behaviour meeting with a learner where the learner is without support or without an offer of support. So a parent or a caregiver or a pastoral coach, or one of our wellbeing team, maybe even one of our on-site counsellors. So you asked actually earlier at the top of the conversation about what was on offer of support.
Yes, and what that looks like.
So in every faculty we have, so across the college, I should say, we have a team of pastoral support coaches who are available to do one-to-one tutorials and also kind of critical support. So they would have a caseload of learners and they will see their learners fairly regularly for one-to-ones. But if there are learners who are particularly vulnerable or they're spiking in some way, then there's flexibility within our system for that pastoral coach to scoop them up and maybe see them more often to get them over that kind of period of crisis, to make sure that they're still attending, to pick up the phone to see, you haven't been in for a few.
And of course, attendance is a behaviour, isn't it? Yes,
absolutely.
For attendance. So,
I mean, we've been really, really lucky in the last year. More than the last year, not only have we got this amazing team of highly skilled pastoral support coaches, we have on-site counselling and a wellbeing team, as well as obviously our safeguarding team. But we were able to secure some project funding for retention officers to support the work of our pastoral support coaches. Now, we have seen our attendance and our retention improve hugely over this academic
direct
year.
Correlation between those roles.
Correlation of how obviously the retention officers aren't working in isolation. They're working hand in hand with course tutors, with pastoral support coaches, and with the learner. But it's project funding. And so we are in the sad position of having this incredible team of highly skilled people who we can see that in one faculty, retention has improved by 14% in one academic year. That's incredible.
There's an end date to these roles.
They are now ended. And so we are in the position of having to, look at our existing pastoral provision, which was working well, but this was more. This was like the XXX version, which was really making some positive movement on attendance and retention, which leads into behaviour, because if the learners are, if your young people are attending, they're on site and you're seeing them, they're not missing out on the learning, so they're less likely to go in and be disruptive in their lessons. They're less likely to, all of that kind of niggly behaviour. And you have those
opportunities to engage them in that
absolutely.
very important learning.
And all of that relationship building, is just so important. And I think I've worked across a couple of sectors, Janine. I've worked in secondary setting and in FE. And obviously it's some years since I've worked in a secondary setting, but and it's very different. But what I admire and I respect about the FE sector is how fleet-footed FE is in thinking about how to support the learner and how to support the learner as an individual over a whole group.
And that context is ever changing, isn't it? So it's that fleet-footedness is hugely important.
I think that pastoral coach role in Cardiff and Vale College is called Progress Coach. And I think the work recently done by Meda and Colleges Wales with consultants looking at those behavioural pastoral roles and the impact.
Are they temporarily funded?
Ours have been fixed term, but we've taken the decision this year to make those roles permanent because of the impact that they are having. They, as well as delivering the tutorial, they meet with learners one-to-one. They are that first point of contact for anything and can signpost then onto more specialist support if needed. But they are really key in providing our learners with that one point of contact, so that and can chase up attendance if learners are not there. They're immediate. They don't have to. If a lecturer has that role, they have to wait until they've finished that class, and they might be running straight to another class. But a progress coach is more available to call, to speak to learners, to meet with learners, to ensure that they come to college and that they remain on track with their work. It's vital.
It's that consistent person, isn't it?
They build a relationship up with the young people that they work with as well, I imagine.
Yeah. And it's when you're thinking again through that trauma-informed lens, that consistency of support is really critical. But where it's critical for an experience, so a trauma-experienced young person, it's critical for every young person. It's what works for a trauma-experienced young person works for all young people. And so it's a really great model. And I think most colleges that have adopted some form of additional pastoral support over the past few years, partly in reaction to the kind of the anxious and phobic behaviours that we've seen post-pandemic as well, because that is we haven't kind of touched on that yet. That's still I know that you did in your report, still an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, I was going to ask as well, just before we move on, and I would like to move on to that post-pandemic aspect. The feedback from the young people about those roles, those pastoral roles, progress coaches, retention officers, I think you called them. What do the young people tell you about those roles? How important is it to them directly?
I think it's important to have. They tell us that it's important to have those individual people timetable to meet them. And right from the very start, they start with induction, that this is the person that you can talk to. They will talk to you about what you like in college, what might be going wrong for you, can signpost you to additional support if you need that. But it's just that person to check in that you're okay.
They're trusted adult within...
who can represent you in different meetings that you might have, who can talk to you about your work, who can talk to you about how well you've settled in, and who can help you if there is anything that goes wrong in that trauma-informed way that they learn about you right from the very beginning. And you as an individual and your individual needs.
They know the young people well. So going back to your point, Ava, about post-pandemic, and it was something we picked up on in the report, and the messages that were coming through was young people, and we all know that many of them were in their bedrooms for a long time. There was that delay in the development of the social skills, the levels of maturity. Are you still seeing the impact in colleges? Is it evening out now? What does it look like sort of post-pandemic?
We are definitely still seeing it in colleges, and I don't think I would be confident to say that it's evening out yet. I think that maybe this sounds pessimistic, Janine, but I think we will continue to see the effects for some years to come, to be honest with you, because of the time. There was a lot of lost time. Yes. And when you track back to, those children who were babies and toddlers during that time, who are obviously still in primary school now, primary schools will tell you that they're reporting delayed speech development and delayed social behaviour at age 5, age 6, 7, 8. Then they were babies and toddlers at that time. And so it stands to reason that we will, unless there are, of course, there will be interventions put in place in their primary school and their secondary school, but I think we will still see the effects for some years to come.
And obviously that has an impact on staff as well, Michelle. Those dealing with those challenges in turn is an added layer of sort of demand for the staff working with those young people.
And I think what's really important is that we think about how we help those learners transition into college and the work to support transition. It doesn't just start in induction, but it starts much further back than that. And to help and support our colleagues in engaging our learners from induction, we've put transition officers in place who work specifically with learners at school and help them in their transition to college, make sure that we're clear about their needs and how we can support those needs as learners come to college, but also transition activities, keeping in touch days throughout the summer where learners come into college, get to spend some time with the teaching team, look at the spaces where they're going to be studying. Because if you think about our city centre campus at Cardiganville College, it's a big open space with lots and lots of people. And if you've been in a small school and maybe you didn't attend very much, you're not used to a lot of people around you, just getting over the door, that threshold on your first day.
So there's a lot of hand-holding.
There's a lot of hand-holding.
Through that stage.
Specifically this summer, we're running a summer course for those who've been looked after and for some other learners who've struggled with that transition to college. And so we're running a week's provision with youth offending and some other agencies to help learners in that transition into college, looking at being ready for September, whether that's how you get up to catch your bus and to get into college, and how you feel about being in this space, which will have lots of other people coming and going.
Thank you. Can I go back to the sort of the question around staff and supporting staff and the pressures that they're dealing with? So how do you do that as colleges? How do you ensure that your staff have the tools, the skills, and equally how they're supported when they are sort of dealing with sometimes quite troubling behaviours?
I think that obviously whole staff CPD, professional development, is paramount. And so every year obviously we'll have to have a teaching and learning focus, but we'll make sure that we have a behaviour focus and a wellbeing focus, so that similarly to the learner being heard in the process, your staff need to be heard as well. We have recently audited or surveyed staff, I should say, and I'm kind of pleased to report that actually staff feel that behaviour is fairly well managed within the college. They have quite positive views on certainly the behaviour policy and kind of how swiftly and transparently matters are dealt with. So I think that I'm speaking from a fairly positive position, but I would say that is because the hard yards have been put in the training. We've still got more to do. There's always more to do. And so staff feel supported by the fact that we make sure they've got the tools to work with challenging behaviours.
And are there other mechanisms, perhaps, Michelle, you can sort of explore this a little bit further beyond the training for staff? So in the same way that you talked about young people being able to access support, what about for staff in your organisation?
This time last year, we were coming to the end of our process of revising our behaviour strategy and our behaviour policy and procedure. And the focus for us was that we co-created it with our teams, various teams of staff. But because we wanted to have behaviour as everybody's responsibility, it was really important that we had the structures in place to ensure that everybody was confident that it was their responsibility. And that 3-stage process is really important, but we set up the tools behind it. So as part of the training, for example, we did language models for how to approach a learner and what to say, and your body language when you approached a learner, but more importantly, language models for giving you a way out if the conversation hadn't gone well. Because if you're less experienced with dealing with some challenging behaviour, leaving that conversation is tougher.
So real tangible tools.
Yeah, so real tangible tools to have it. But also then that went through the whole 3 stages of the behaviour procedure, that we had checklists for managing meetings and behaviour meetings when it went to stage 2, and letters that could be sent out, checklists for managing investigations for when it goes to the stage 3, which is that highest stage when a learner could be asked to leave college or to be suspended. So it's all about that scaffold approach to our staff, but that also helps learners see the consistency of the approach.
Thank you. Sorry,
I just want to say we've done similarly. In fact, we've got a theatre company coming in across this summer's management week to work with a faculty that have had they've had lots of behavioural issues to deal with this year, and staff have requested those tools. So the theatre company are coming in to kind of act through those kind of scripted scenarios for the staff to kind of react in a safe space, and then create our own checklist, if you like. I think you called it a checklist for how to respond in positive ways to challenging behaviour.
And you've targeting that at a particular curriculum area where you said...
Yeah, to pilot it there, because that's the area of greatest need. But then, but should that work, I've no reason to think it won't work. We'll roll it out across the rest of the college provision.
But as Ava mentioned earlier, with FE, we know that in September we're going to have another 4,000 new people come across.
And we start all over again.
And we start all over again. Okay. So it's really important that we
with different challenges.
Yes, but that we reinforce right from, over that summer period. This is how we felt with our behaviour procedure last year. This is our learning from it. This is what worked. This is what didn't work. And reinforcing the training and the behaviours so that we are all confident to start again in September.
Thank you. And just very briefly, before we wrap up, and you've touched on some of this as we've been talking, partnership working with other agencies, and you've named some organisations or sort of individuals that you've worked with to support him with behaviour. Ava, I know that your college had a particular spotlight around that in the report. Can you talk to me just a little bit more about the the types of organisations you work with and how that works?
Well, with pleasure. I mean, I think you can already see that as a sector, I think we're very good at sharing with each other. And learning from each other in partnership as FEIs. In Pembrokeshire College, we have a very well-established relationship with our local authority, which includes an annually reviewed memorandum of understanding with the local authority and what we call our partner schools. So our partner schools are schools who, for falling demographic reasons, have recently had their sixth form closed, and so we are their sort of default choice. But we want it not to be we need it to be more than just the default choice. It needs to be the destination of choice for learners from these schools. So that strengthens our transition from, you mentioned this earlier about transition work, Michelle, but, we'll start our transition work with these schools maybe as early as year 8, certainly in year 9, with regular contact. And those schools actually come in to establish formal committees. Our safeguarding work, we work very closely with Coleg Sgwrs, which is our neighbouring college, on our policy and our systems and the way that our dashboards work, although we're obviously separate entities. And then, of course, with the police, we have, and with the local youth service, counselling service, third sector, PAVs. It's really, I mean, and I'm sure every college would stand up to say, yes, absolutely, we do that too. That community approach to come together to support the young person is absolutely critical. There's so much learning from multi-agency working.
That gives you the knowledge before the young person joins you, but equally the ongoing support as the young person.
And it's also in you, that information sharing between the third sector, between many agencies, that if something's happening in our community and our learners are involved in that, it's really important that we find out about that as quickly as possible, because if we don't know about it, we can't be part of the solution. And all colleges will be like that, because we need to work together as that multi-agency team to support our learners with whatever that is within the communities.
Absolutely.
Thank you both for joining us today. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and thank you for sharing such valuable insights. Just before we sign off, could I ask each of you, if you had to share just one takeaway to share with other colleagues across the sector, what that might be? So Ava, if I start with you.
So I think it would have to be the power of partnership working. We really are collaborative as a sector, and we work best when we work together, as we do with other organisations.
Thank you, Ava. And for you, Michelle?
I think for me, it's the importance of making sure that any behaviour policy is clear, simple, and is communicated to staff to ensure that there is consistency of practice.
Thank you. And thank you for all the discussion today. I've appreciated all your contributions. If you would like to read the report in full, it's available on our Estyn website. Thank you both.
Thank you.